My name is Leona Fake, and this is my life story. Now you want my picture, I believe. This is my life story. I was born on May 18th, 1918, in Delano, Minnesota, the oldest child of Anthony and Elizabeth Shoust. I had 3 sisters, Betty, Arlene, and Genevieve, and 6 brothers, Anthony, Lauren, Joseph, George, Leonard, and Matthias. And Genevieve and George were twins. I also had a half-sister who was 9 years older than myself, named Matilda. My grandparents were Matthias and Catherine Mater Shoust and Andrew and Emma Torgerson Pagreba. My parents lived on a farm 4 miles west of Delano. My dad was of German nationality, and my mother was Norwegian and Polish, or German. Grandpa was born in Germany, and with all the fighting in the area, they were under one ruler or another. He came from Opel, Germany. All 10 of us children were born at home. No one went to the hospital to have their baby. The doctor always came to the home. My mother's sister, Anna Berg, came out from Minneapolis and stayed at our house for 2 weeks. In those days, the mother was kept in bed for 10 days after giving birth. Aunt Annie took care of Mama and baby and did the meals. During the time Aunt Annie was with us, I remember in particular the baths on Saturday night. The fire in our wood range was warm and toasty, and the water was heated. The laundry tub served as our bathtub, and each one of us had our turn, starting from the youngest to the oldest. A lady in Delano by the name of Mrs. Teresa Kasimer did the laundry for us during that time. Dad went into town to get her and took her home when the work was done. Mrs. Kasimer was a very poor lady, as her husband was killed on the railroad, and for whatever reason, she received no insurance. She also had a family. Baby was bathed early each morning, and Mom would have the baby wash on the line by 9:30. There were no disposable diapers, nor washers and dryers. Washing was done by rubbing clothes on a washing board, and the white clothes were boiled in a wash boiler to make them white. The Maytag washer was a wonderful help and came into being in our house with the birth of the twins. I do not remember the house I was born in, as I was 6 years old when my dad built the new house that stands on the farm today. That summer, we lived in the nice 2-story granary which we had on our farm. There were beautiful hardwood floors. Mama had all the rooms divided off with sheets. It was very comfortable. The old house was torn down to allow the new one to be built on the same site. Anthony, who was 4 years old, felt pretty bad and one day said, "Mama, tell them to put it back up." In the fall, we moved into the new house. Lauren was the baby and would be 1 year old in November. He was pushing chairs around quite well while in the granary, learning to walk, but he was slowed down immensely when he got on the new varnished floors. I started school that same fall, attending the District 31 school, which was just across the road from our house. For my second grade, I attended St. Peter's School and continued on through the 8th grade, except for the 4th grade when the new St. Peter's School was built. In the fall and spring, I walked a half-mile to the crossroads to catch a ride with George and Florence Huncha, who drove a one-horse carriage into school each day. Hunches would call one house our house and tell Mom it was time for me to leave for the ride. When arriving in Delano, Florence and myself would get out and walk to school while George would take the horse and carriage to his grandparents who lived behind St. Joseph's Church. He would then walk across town to school, and in the afternoon we returned home with the horse and carriage, and once again I would walk the half-mile stretch to my home. Yannick's Woods was along this walk. With their herd of cattle, everyone had a bull with their cattle. I was so afraid. I don't think the cattle were there in the early morning, but in the afternoon I remember how afraid I was walking along. I couldn't wait to get to the top of the hill and the buildings which were on the George Fouch farm, as I always pictured hiding in one of those sheds if the bull ever did come running to the fence or broke out. During the winter months, I stayed in town at the home of an elderly Polish couple who took in children for boarding. My dad would take me along and the cream that went to the creamery. I'm sure he had cream from the neighbors as well. It was very cold and everything had to be covered well to keep from freezing. We had a wonderful fur robe along with all the other warm clothing. Bricks were heated and wrapped, and we put our feet on them for warmth. 4 families, a total of 7, stayed at this house. I remember Mama packed some food, but what, I can't remember. After we had our evening meal, each one of us had our turn to dry dishes. Mrs. Strelka was a very clean lady and always made sure a tea kettle of boiling water was ready to pour over the dishes before we dried them. After we had our homework done, we went outdoors for a little fun in the snow before bedtime. Sometime a lady half a block up the street had us come and strip feathers. One could hardly breathe during that time for fear of blowing feathers away. After the job was done, Mrs. Nalawaya would set out a dish of candy, and after a couple pieces of candy, we would go home, frolicking in the snow and ready for bed. After her high school years, Florence became a nun and is known as Sister Vivian. I think I stayed at Strelka's through the 4th grade, and my brother Anthony stayed there as well after he started school. That made the two of us, and we were the youngest, and George and Florence Huncha, Ethel, and Adeline Floric, and Annie Nalavaya. Also Margaret Huncha, which later made it 8 total. We were a busy family of children, and according to our age, each one had his chores. Milking cows was of the utmost importance, as milking was done by hand. So it was a big help when us kids could start and help out, perhaps in the 3rd grade, with a couple of cows that were not milking very heavy. Mama always helped and milked maybe 4 cows, and Dad maybe 5 or 6 cows, and maybe a 7th if had to be. This was every morning and evening, and one had to be careful not to overdo your hands. At that time, there were no milk machines. Besides helping to milk cows, water and wood needed to be carried in. It took a lot of water for the cooking, baking, and cleaning, and on wash day we filled a tub and boiler with water the night before as to help Mama to get an early start. Water came from the windmill, and if there wasn't enough wind, we had to pump it by hand. Later on, a gasoline-powered engine was used. A wood box stood beside the kitchen stove, had to be filled each day. Wood for the stove was in the woodshed, which was close to the house. The woodshed and the garage was all one building, but separated by a wall between. Clothes were not of the permanent press type, and everything from dish towels, shirts, blouses, and dresses as well as everyday shirts and jeans were ironed, with irons heated on the kitchen stove. Dad never did his everyday chores with a shirt that wasn't ironed. A room in the basement was filled with wood for the furnace. Everyone helped with these chores. But in the beautiful summer weather, some of us older ones had other chores to do. Betty seemed to have the responsibility of watching the smaller members of the family on their outdoor time on the lawn. During those years, the home was pretty much self-sustaining. Every farm had the cows, pigs, and chickens. Eggs were picked and brought in from the hen house. Chickens were butchered for meat and for meals, and in the winter time, along with 2 or 3 hogs, pretty much supplied the meat needed for our family. At that time, with no freezers available to people, the meat was preserved in many different ways. Bacon and hams were put in salt brine for 6 weeks and then smoked. This would keep the meat for the summer, as Dad would leave it hang in the smokehouse, and during the summertime, Dad would build a fire to make sure it would keep okay. Also, pork steak was fried and packed in crock jars, and the lard poured over, covering the meat. I was somewhere in the grades when a new way of preserving meat was introduced. It was to cold pack it in preserve jars, which meant browning the meat some and putting it in the jars, and then boiling the jars for 3 hours. It was at this time that beef was added to the butchering. So Mama started to can every meat available, to chicken and sausage and everything in between. I can taste the sausage yet that Mom and Dad made. It was so good. All the bread, rolls, pies, cakes, donuts, and cookies were home baked. When mixing the donuts, Mama always rolled and cut them before putting them in the hot lard. It was always a large batch, and at least 1 or 2 of us went around the table to count how many donuts were laid out to cook. Dad took the wheat and to the mill for grinding and would bring home 7 to 8 sacks of flour. I can't say how long this lasted, but with all 10 of us kids around, plus my half-sister, all I can say, Mama baked bread 3 times a week, 20 to 25 loaves to a baking. The pies and cakes were common at our house and vanished almost as fast as baked. We always had an early garden and a big garden. My half-sister and myself cleaned lettuce and garden vegetables every morning, especially lettuce and radishes, and peeled the potatoes. This was summer vacation time, and we had a nice long table in the backyard, and during the nice weather did our work out there. We had a lot of enjoyment, did a great deal of singing, made crowning songs. Most of all, my mother was busy taking care of baby and had the baby wash out on the line and 3 pies baked by 10 o'clock in the morning, or 10:30. My dad built every building on the place, so there was always people to feed, plus a lot of company, which we seemed to have. My mother's parents, brothers and sisters, lived in Minneapolis, and they came out often. We had company every Sunday, and Aunt Agnes, who was married to Edgar McAlpin, the chief of police in South St. Paul. They always drove out during the week.
Okay, I stopped.
This is 6, okay.
Okay.
Also, my dad had a couple of aunts, plus his sisters, who visited off and on. One time, Mama's brother, our Uncle Johnny, took a couple of us to Minneapolis on the train for a few days. The train ride was exciting, and it was great to visit with our cousins in the cities. but we were always glad to get back home and be together. Most of our company got in on a good meal, but on the occasion of a short visit, Mama always served a glass of her famous fig wine and a cookie or a piece of cake. Once a year, Mama would go to Minneapolis and buy the figs that she made the wine from. They also made beer and root beer. Being a large family, most of our fun, time, and entertainment was at home with our parents. Everything was fun, whether it was a ball game on the lawn, on Sunday afternoon, a game of checkers or cards, or popping corn, and a batch of homemade fudge. Other happenings for us was when neighbors gathered at our house to listen to the wonderful console radio, especially when there was a champion fight. After the school board meeting was another time for a company and a good game of Shafka. My mother was clerk on the school board, and Fred Addix, a board member, who always walked through our yard to attend the meeting and stopped at our house after. In the rural areas, we were one of two families with electric. My dad and his brother Ambrose, who farmed across the road from us, paid for the electric line to be built from the Highway 12 to our farms. It was most wonderful when the electric was turned on. We had a nice new house. I was going into the 5th grade. It was that same fall in September, the day after the lights were turned on, that my grandpa and grandma Pagreba had their 50th wedding anniversary at our house. It was a memorable event, with the house decorated in gold and white, even to the 2 sets of dinnerware, service for 12, gold-rimmed, on white linen tablecloths. A small band played all afternoon. My cousin Mark Berg was a member. There was a dance in the granary in the evening. Relatives came for this celebration from Browerville, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and other towns. Our neighbors as well. A local group furnished the music for the evening. It was all very exciting. Well, when a death in the family occurred, the wake was held in the home. My Uncle Leo Pagreba and my Grandpa and Grandma Pagreba were waked at our house. Uncle Leo lived at Box Elder, Montana. Leo was a switchman on the Great Northern Railway and was killed while at work. Leo's wife Frances and daughter Lucille, who was a few years older than myself, also stayed with us during that time. A wake was always for 2 nights. A lunch was served during the night, and 2 or 3 men stayed up all night. Flowers and candles were a part of the wake in the home, exactly as at the mortuary today. Some houses were not built so as to have a casket brought in, and I heard where at times a large living room window had to be taken out for the casket to be brought into the home. Church was of the utmost importance in our family life. I can't say I remember my dad ever missing Sunday Mass, but if weather was such, and I'm talking about going in the sled with horses in the winter, then my dad would be sitting in the front room praying with his prayer book and rosary in hand. No work was done on Sunday except where necessary, like feed the animals and milk the cows. I do remember one particular time when the hay was just perfect for getting in, and it looked like rain. Dad went to the priest for permission to get the hay that Sunday, and the priest said it was okay to put the hay away, but he could not give Dad permission to miss Mass. So after Mass, everyone was busy getting in the hay. I can't remember if all the hay got in before it rained. Also, every first Sunday of the month was Confession and Communion Sunday. Dad took us into confession on Saturday evening, and on that Sunday we went to 8 o'clock Mass and received Holy Communion. At this time we had to fast from midnight from all food and drink to be able to receive. The other Sundays of the month, we usually attended the 10 o'clock Mass, most likely because of the chores and the distance we had to travel. I can't put into words how much I love my parents for all they gave up and for how hard they worked to raise this large family. We come from a good home, enjoyed our mom and dad so much, and have many beautiful memories. My mother passed away at the age of 58 years after a gallbladder operation. She went into St. Mary's Hospital, Minneapolis, on the Monday, had surgery on Tuesday, and in a day or two, when she should have been feeling much better, she had turned for the worst. Her thyroid acted up, causing her heart to go out of control, and she died on Saturday afternoon, much to our dismay, in 1953. Dad lived a good long life, suffered a stroke in April 1966, staying in the Buffalo Hospital until his death on August 1st that same year. On August 3rd, he would have been 80 years old.
Oh,
This is a story of the house on northwest corner of 4th Street and Highway 12 in Delano, Minnesota. The house was built by Andrew and Emma Pagreba in 1913. Mr. and Mrs. Pagreba are shown on the porch of their home, along with two daughters, Anna Berg and Minnie, along with two grandchildren, Don and Dorothy Berg. To the left are three daughters, Nora, Elizabeth, and Agnes. Nora was a telephone operator in Delano. Elizabeth worked for the Delano Printing Company in Delano, and Agnes was a teacher and married Edgar McAlpin, chief of police in South St. Paul. Elizabeth married Anthony M. Shoust. There were 10 children. It is enjoyable to know our grandfather built this house as we go past on 4th Street. Andrew Pagreba was born in Germany, November 30, 1855, son of Urban and Agnes Halleck Pagreba. There were 8 sons in the family: John, Thomas, Jacob, Andrew, Albert, Peter, Robert, and William. Andrew was reared in Germany, attended the public schools, and as a youth learned the trade of a baker. In 1873, he came to America, and after working a month in Chicago, arrived in Delano. Here he began work on the right-of-way of the Great Northern. His ability and intelligence attracted attention, and he soon became foreman. Still later, he was made roadmaster. By frugal savings, he was enabled to purchase a store in Everest Village, Cass County, North Dakota, in the year of 1890. But the store burned down 5 years later, and he returned to Delano. In 1910, he purchased a farm where he raised crops and livestock and was successful in his undertakings. In the spring of 1914, he was elected mayor of Delano by a substantial majority. Children of Anthony and Elizabeth Shoust and grandchildren to Andrew and Emma Pagreba are Leona Fake, Anthony Shoust Jr., Elizabeth Betty Gabrelsic, Lauren Shoust, Joseph Shoust, Arlene Litvin, George Shoust, Genevieve Farniak, Leonard Shoust, and Matthias Shoust.